Welcome to the role of psychological concepts in coaching, where the realms of psychology and coaching unite. I am Nancy Al-Hayari, your guide on this journey, brought to you by the passionate teams that trace and thrive through coaching. We're dedicated to equipping coaches like you with the cutting-edge evidence-based strategies to enhance your practice and impact. From emotional intelligence to neurodiversity, each episode is a deep dive into the tools and techniques that can transform your coaching and your clients' lives. Let's embark on this journey together, one insight at a time. Have you ever wondered how psychological safety can revolutionize team dynamics and boost performance? Welcome to episode 8 of the role of psychological concepts in coaching. Today we're going to talk about the critical importance of psychological safety in team coaching. Our special guest for today is Heather Thomson, owner of Bold and Brave Coaching and co-owner of Lumilead. Heather is an ICF Associated Certified Coach and a Certified Fearless Practitioner, specializing in measuring psychological safety within an organization using the Fearless Organization Scan. With a passion for creating inclusive environments, Heather helps teams foster a sense of belonging, increase productivity, and build strong relationships. Based in Alberta, Canada, she balances her professional dedication with the joy she finds in her family life. In this episode, Heather will share her deep insight into psychological safety, offering practical strategies to help team thrive. We will explore how psychological safety enhances team cohesion, drives productivities, and cultivates a culture of trust and belonging. Whether you're a coach, a team leader, or someone eager to improve team effectiveness, this conversation will equip you with valuable tools to create psychologically safe environments. So let's dive in. Hello, Heather, and thank you for joining me to explore the impact of psychological safety in team coaching.
Yeah, Nancy, thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you, Heather. To start, could you please define psychological safety and explain its importance to team dynamics?
Sure, that's a great question. So psychological safety is really about a shared belief that a team has where people feel safe to take that interpersonal risk, right? And it's really about team members feeling comfortable expressing their ideas, sharing opinions and concerns without that worry really of being ridiculed or rejected or having things held against them. And individuals trust that when there is psychological safety, that they are free and open to share ideas, challenge ideas, and be able to increase that engagement on the team and that openness amongst the team members.
Thank you for that clear definition, Heather. This leads me to wonder, how does this concept, the psychological safety, differs from related ideas like team cohesion or trust?
Yeah, so psychological safety is really about feeling comfortable, speaking up and sharing those ideas and expressing those concerns, really without any fear of any negative consequences. The team member perceives that environment as really safe for them to take those interpersonal risks. When we look at team cohesion, it's really about that degree of unity, camaraderie, and that solidarity among team members. And it's about a sense of belonging and shared purpose, but cohesive teams often are working together harmoniously, and they support one another and strive towards those common goals. Now, trust is also about, involving the confidence and reliance team members have really in each other's intentions, capabilities, and reliability. And I really think about Stephen Covey has the 13 behaviors of trust around character and competence. So it's really focused on that. And it allows people to delegate tasks, collaborate effectively, and rely on one another. But psychological safety is part of, team cohesion and part of trust, but it's more focused on really creating that environment where individuals feel comfortable sharing ideas without that fear of judgment or retribution.
Interesting distinction, Heather. Can we say that psychological safety would offer better performance for teams over, cohesion and only trust?
Yeah, and so I think psychological safety is really that foundation, right? If you don't have psychological safety, it's going to be really difficult to have that team cohesion. And if you don't have psychological safety, it's going to be really hard to build trust.
Awesome. Thank you. So understanding the unique role of psychological safety certainly helps in grasping its value in teamwork. Could you please highlight any key research or theories that have significantly advanced our understanding of this concept in organizational contexts?
Yeah, I think, there's been a lot of research around psychological safety, and it starts back even to the 1800s. But where I find it really interesting is, anybody that's done a psychology degree or studied business or, anything around human like organization behavior is, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And we start really with that, right? Because if you think about that pyramid, you need that like physiological and safety is the bottom pillar. So that's, I think, where we started. That's, we started to look at that research. But then there's other research, right? And then we have an article that research from Edgar Shane and Warren Bennett, and they talk about really about people don't want to be punished for what makes them human. So they wrote an article, in that. And then in the 1990s, William Kahn followed up. He wrote another article called Psychological Conditions of Personal Engagement and Disengagement at Work. And he wrote about really the need that people need to feel safe to express themselves authentically. And then in the late 90s, we have Amy Edmondson, and she's done over 2 decades of research around psychological safety, and has really moved that, through her research, has really moved that topic around and made organizations start to think about psychological safety in the context of their work environment. And what her big idea was is psychological safety is really a shared experience, and that it's also a shared responsibility. So she's done a lot of work around that. We have Google. They had the Project Aristotle. That's another thing that they started to look within their organization about what makes teams so effective at Google. And they found that psychological safety is really the defining characteristic of the most high performing teams. We have Timothy Clark. He's done research as well around psychological safety, and he's written the book, 4 Stages of Psychological Safety, Defining the Path to Inclusion and Innovation. And he looks at modeling and rewarding vulnerability in the way to build psychological safety, and he does it across 4 stages. So all of these, have really been moving and pivotal in the research and the way that we look at psychological safety today.
Awesome, Heather. Can we expand a little bit on the idea that you've mentioned, shared experience and shared responsibility?
Yeah, so when I think about psychological safety, there's three key drivers, right? So it's the leadership, there's also the team, and then organizational culture. And so knowing that these three factors interact together and they need to be working together. So we look at a relationship between leader and team, we look at a relationship between team and team, and we look at a relationship again between leader, team, and organization. And knowing that it's a shared responsibility for people within that organization to create that psychological safety throughout the whole organization, and to be able to look at that and know that without that psychological safety, we're missing that key component that allows us to create that open communication, that allows us to be innovative and creative, that allows us to continue to engage and grow as an organization. So these are just some of the fundamental areas where we need to think about for psychological safety, and how it's not just one person, but it's the organization in an entirety. It's their vision, it's their mission, it's their core values. What do they stand for? And what does that look like in your team and in your company?
Thank you, Heather. So it's the trio, team, leader, and organization. So can we say, like, for a team, it's about the team members will be comfortable in maybe saying that this project is not gonna go the way it is intended, for example, to the leader, instead of hiding out. This is how it looks like.
Yeah, and that's a great, analogy there, Nancy, because I think what we need to look at is to create those environments where we can have those open discussions and be able to say, to challenge ideas, right? We're not challenging people, we're challenging ideas. And we'll often hear in organizations, oh, we do that. Why are we doing that? Well, we've always done it that way. So when people come in with new and innovative ideas, we want to be able to create that opportunity for people to share their thoughts and ideas, challenge the status quo, right? To be able to lean into that and not worry about, I said that at the meeting. Now I'm worried about my promotion that's coming up next month, or I'm worried about opportunities within the organization, or I'm seen as a troublemaker. And so we want to be able to create those opportunities where people can freely express those thoughts and ideas. And when we're able to do that, we know that we start to see thinking outside the box. We start to see different things that can happen within our team and organization. And we come up with ideas that maybe we never would have thought of before when we're creating an environment where it's okay and it's expected to challenge, some of those ideas in the status quo.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you. And could you share an experience where enhancing psychological safety led to a breakthrough in a team's performance?
Yeah, and so one of the things that I would like to share is really an experience that I had where, working with a team that was, the leader felt there was psychological safety. The team felt more like they were micromanaged. And so what was happening was the leader had really wanted to be involved in all of the processes and didn't give people the opportunity to share ideas, to share thoughts. And he created this environment where it was more coming together and people were talking and sharing ideas, and then they would walk away, and he wouldn't implement any of the ideas. He wouldn't implement any of the suggestions. And so he created this environment where no matter what people said, he still would go into the meeting. He had his own thoughts and ideas, and he still he wasn't willing to listen to people, even though it looked like he was creating this collaborative environment, and in his mind he was creating a collaborative environment because they were all coming together, but he still wasn't following through on ideas, following through on suggestions, and really created this unhealthy environment on the team. And so when I started to work with him, we started to look at, how do you want to show up as a leader? How do you want to, when you're coming together as a team and you're asking for ideas and input, why are you not leaning into those and exploring those further? And so when he started to create that self-awareness around how he was showing up as a leader, started to change, the way that he approached these meetings. He started to change the way that he took ideas and suggestions, and he was really able to change the dynamic of that team. And oftentimes and he felt really that people could come and talk to him all the time. People could come and share their thoughts and ideas, but the reality wasn't that way. And oftentimes many leaders think that, I have this open door policy. I have this situation where people can come and talk to me and they feel safe to share their thoughts and ideas. And when we start to take a look and dig in a little bit deeper, sometimes what we perceive is not always what is reality. And I think by taking that step back and being able to create that awareness around, even though you think your actions are helpful, the things that you're doing, you're not actually moving the team forward and creating this disconnect between people feeling safe to share their thoughts and ideas and what you perceive as, I'm creating this collaborative environment.
Well, what a powerful example of psychological safety at work. And I think that takes as well a strength for the leader to step back and reevaluate their leadership style and start working on themselves. So this is a really powerful story. Thank you for sharing that. And with your expertise, what approaches do you use usually to evaluate the psychological safety levels in teams?
Yeah, it's a great question. One of the things that I like to use is the Fearless Organization Scan. So it's a tool. And one of the things from a coaching lens is when we start to measure things, I think when we start to measure things, we start to see results. And using this tool has been really helpful in the way that it allows people to see things that they might not have seen before. And the tool was designed by Amy Edmondson, and it's distributed by Bright Instrument. And it's basically a series of 7 questions, and it takes about 3 to 5 minutes to answer those questions. And based on the results of that tool, it allows us to really start to dig in and look at different areas within the organization. What I love about it, and I always think about this, what gets measured gets results. And so the tool allows us to really look at and focus at some of the key areas around psychological safety and what that looks like on our team. And I mentioned a bit earlier there that they did a survey and they found that 75% of leaders overestimate the degree of psychological safety in their team. And so this tool allows us to get a snapshot of time. Where is the team at around psychological safety, and really be able to allow us to start to move forward and be able to create action and in the area around the psychological safety.
Awesome. Thank you. That's a comprehensive approach to evaluation. So what I understood, like this 7-question tool would take us from a big picture and then dig into the details of the psychological safety within a team. From your experience, what specific tactics have you found effective in building a stronger sense of belonging and boosting productivity through psychological safety?
Yeah, so I think some of the strategies that I use to help teams build that greater sense of belonging is, creating that safe space for discussion, right? And so the coach working with different teams, it's about looking at opportunities to celebrate wins, but also to be able to address areas where people failed or things didn't go as well as planned and talk about those experiences in a way that how do we learn from those experiences? I think it's about being able to provide, support and encouragement to team members and knowing that, through the coaching and those discussions and asking those different questions, that also helps us build a greater sense of belonging and safety. I think also about, being able to lead by example and, being able to model that behavior and promote psychological safety, things around things such as like open feedback, admitting mistakes, that vulnerability, right? And encouraging and, really digging into diverse perspectives, right? The other thing is to be able to create some team building activities where we can create that sense of belonging, right? And allow people to collaborate, communicate, trust building, right? And being able to provide those opportunities. I think about providing people with training and education. So different workshops around how do we communicate better, difficult conversations where people struggle sometimes. Nobody wants to have a difficult conversation because they're difficult, right? Conflict resolution and even leaning into emotional intelligence, right? So these are some of the strategies, identifying and making sure that norms like purpose and goals are clear for people, and then creating norms around those and expectations and working with teams to how do you develop that? What does that look like? And encouraging that growth mindset, being able to learn, know that learning is a journey. And oftentimes through failure is where some of our greatest learning occurs. And so being able to create that environment as well for people.
Beautifully said, Heather. These tactics sound incredibly effective. As with any change, there's often going to be resistance. What approaches do you take when facing resistance to establishing this psychological safety in teams?
Yeah, and so we know with change there is resistance. And I think the really important thing is to lean in and to understand where that resistance is coming from. Oftentimes, when people think about psychological safety, maybe their definition is not clear. What does that mean? What does that look like? Right? And digging deeper into that, into those questions. Sometimes people think, well, if it's you have a psychological safe environment, then I can just say anything that I want. Well, no, that's not okay either, right? And so, or I can make as many mistakes as I want. And so if we're continuing to make the same mistakes, that's a problem, right? It could be a training problem or a clarity around goal problem. But psychological safety is not about that. It's really about creating that environment where we can challenge each other, where we can learn from each other. There's high accountability with high psychological safety, and that's the environment that really creates that learning area for us to continue to learn and grow. And so when people resist, I always think, what is that they're not understanding? What is it that is causing the resistance? And really leaning in and being able to explore that, and also to debunk some of the myths around psychological safety.
Thank you, Heather. Understanding certainly is key. And I love how you said, like, challenging each other, learn from each other, and together we can grow. As you've mentioned, overcoming this resistance is crucial to foster psychological safety in any organization. And speaking of it, fostering, how can coaches equip leaders to not only establish the psychological safety in their teams, but as well maintain it, to have that sustainability, especially when we have a diverse or a high stress setting in our organization?
That's a great question. And I think one of the big things is really about if we're clear on purpose and goals, right? And then moving forward with that, I think being consistent, creating systems in place to be able to create that environment where we come in and we have those meetings where people do feel comfortable to challenge. And I think it's a leader's responsibility to create that environment for other people to flourish. And how do we do that? By creating consistent systems, by creating opportunities where people feel comfortable. With some organizations will say on Monday, we're going to celebrate our wins. What do our wins look like for the week? And then on Fridays, we look at, where did we fail or where were the challenges, and talking about that and creating that as part of the system within the system. Making sure that, when we talk about open door policy, well, what does that really mean for my team? What does that really look like? I think as a leader, getting out there and talking, building those relationships and connections with others as well, and showing your vulnerability. And so the leader is responsible for it. If you value psychological safety, what are you doing about that? And again, I'm going to go back to that fearless scan, because it's a really great tool that allows us to look at, some key areas, inclusion and diversity. Well, what does that look like? How are we doing that? Willingness to take risks. Well, what does that look like? What happens when we are successful, but also what happens when we fail? Being able to have that open communication. What does that look like? And clearly define that and model that for your team as well. So the leader, it's a big responsibility as a leader, but you're setting up the systems and you're making sure that you're creating that consistency, those check-ins, and really, if you value psychological safety, what are you going to do about it? And what does that look like for you? And talking to your team, what does that look like? And how do we sustain it?
Thank you, Heather. So leaders are the heart of the psychological safety. With the right tools and exercise, they can certainly make a difference. So can you share with us, please, what some exercises or tools you recommend for promoting psychological safety in team environments?
Yeah, I think really, again, assessing the team dynamics, what does that look like? Getting feedback from your team members. I think clarifying purpose and goals is really important. Identify in the group, where is there uncertainty, right? What do we know and what don't we know? What are we curious about? Creating interdependence. So thinking about, who needs to share the knowledge or info, and how are they going to share this knowledge, or what does that exchange look like? I think also in this environment, being really clear about what is the role of the leader, what are expectations and shared understanding of what the leader can and will do. And, I talked about this earlier. How do we address failure? Whatever type of failure, what's the goal and how do we learn from that? And then what will happen if things don't change? So taking a look at it, I think that process, 7-step process there, being able to think about, how can we empower leaders to foster? And those are just, I think it's a good starting point.
Thank you. This sounds very invaluable for teams that are striving to create the psychological safe environment. Reflecting on your own journey, Heather, can you share like a defining moment or like in your career or the moment that you found psychological safety is calling you
Yeah.
and in
Yeah.
your career? Thank you.
Yeah. And so I think for me, probably, the defining moment for me was probably 5 years ago, when I was working in an environment where, there was psychological safety, and then it kind of shifted to where there wasn't psychological safety. And so started to really look at the impact it had on myself. What was different, right? What were the things that were changing? An environment that was free to openly communicate about ideas and share thoughts, to an environment where it was like you need to be mindful and careful about what you're saying. And I'm going to use this example, and it came up in one of the trainings that I was doing around cybersecurity. And we think about how we have our computers, we have the antivirus protection is running in the background and things are going well. And, we don't even really recognize that it's there. But when we forget to renew our subscription and we don't have that safety or protection anymore, things start to go a little bit wonky. And so for me, I would think, that analogy is my journey where, for a long time, I've always worked in an environment where I felt psychologically safe. And when you don't, the impact it had on myself, my colleagues. And so then I started to do some research around it, and I wanted to commit to how can I work with teams and organizations to make sure that we keep psychological safety at the front. It wasn't talked about as much as it is today. And we still have a long way to go around psychological safety. But for me, it's about, sharing my experience and my knowledge and my skills with other teams to be able to help them, create that environment where people flourish and grow.
Thank you for sharing that story, Heather. It does really resonate with me because I do feel like each one of us one day worked with an organization that they felt there's no psychological safety. And it does affect our well being, and it does affect, in a way or another, the retention of the employees in that organization. So, in your experience, how do individual and team psychological safety interact and influence overall team dynamics?
So when I look at a team that has a psychological safety over another team, even within the same organization, we start to look at, what are the systems in place? And we look at those key areas around psychological safety and we examine, what are they doing well? So when we think about inclusion and diversity, what does that look like on your team? How does that show up for you? And how do people feel being part of that team? So really diving into those 4 key areas and then taking that information and using that to help support other teams within the organization. One of the things people think about for psychological safety is, if it's going to come in and we're going to do the work within teams within organizations, they think, oh, we need to work with the teams that are really struggling, right? And they're struggling with low performance, low outcome, low psychological safety. And I say, well, let's take a step back here and look at those teams that are performing well, that do have that high psychological safety, that have that high accountability. And what are the systems and things in place that they do that allow people to feel psychologically safe? And then how do we start to take that and transfer that over into other areas and other teams and creating that as a norm? So we can use that experience as a really invaluable learning experience. Because you think about it, same organization, but 2 different teams and having 2 different feelings around psychological safety, right? And so using that as that learning experience and opportunity to springboard and to continue to create some positive changes within the team.
Fascinating. And while you were talking, I recalled reading somewhere that a team that has psychological safety usually even report more mistakes than the other teams.
Yeah, that research comes from Amy Edmondson, if you read her book, Fearless
Oh, okay.
Organization. And she talks about 2 teams, one in the healthcare industry, and high performing have higher mistakes. The other team, low performing, low mistakes. And that's a great example because we start to dig into what's that about, right? Why is that? If this team has less mistakes, but they have lower psychological safety and they're less effective or impactful, what's happening here? And when you start to dig a little bit deeper, it's not that they have less mistakes, it's that they report less because they don't feel psychologically safe to come forward and say, hey, I made a mistake, right? And so the other team, they do come forward and say, hey, I made a mistake, and they deal with that. And also it looks at it as an opportunity of, how do I learn from that mistake? How do I move forward so that doesn't happen again? What do I need to do? Or maybe there's other people that have done that same mistake too. And how can we set some systems in place that really help people learn and grow and not make that mistake again?
And in your opinion, what would be the individual's role in building the team psychological safety?
Yeah, great question. Individuals have to be open to psychological safety. They have to be, understanding what's the impact. If you have people that are, again, resistant to the idea and thinking, oh, psychological safety is just this kind of woo-woo sort of this is, this is the next best thing, or this is the newest thing. It really makes it hard to change. But I think really when we start to look at why are we doing the psychological safety and the impact it has on other people and really clarifying what it means to people. So it doesn't mean, again, that we don't have, when we think about group cohesion and consensus within a team and decision making, it doesn't mean that everybody has to agree, right? But we have this consensus moving forward. So when individuals are not on board, it makes it harder. It's about how do we get them on board? How do we address the uncertainty that they're feeling? And what's the barrier for them? Because wouldn't we all want to work in an environment that's psychologically safe?
100%. I totally agree. It makes us flourish as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and understanding the role of the individual in team psychological safety, it does offer more insight into the team dynamics. And
Yeah.
looking ahead, what future developments, let's say, in psychological safety we could see that could impact organizational development and team coaching?
I think, that continuing to talk about psychological safety, to write about it, to come and speak about it, I think is really important to move psychological safety forward. I think it's about, really, and I'm, like I said, a big fan of that fearless scan, and what gets measured gets results. And so talking about to organizations around their wellness policy, around their diversity, equity, and inclusion policy, and being able to integrate that as well into it's impacted by psychological safety. So I think it's just getting out, talking about it more, writing about it more, and, seeing where this is going to take us. So I think it's something that's been surface level again, and I'll use that cybersecurity analysis, which isn't mine. It came from a colleague that in one of my trainings. But I think it's about, we're starting to stop and take notice, and what can we do be able to change some of the culture and the work environment.
Thank you, Heather. That was really insightful. And as we wrap up, what one insight you'd like our coaches to remember about fostering psychological safety in team setting?
I think from a coaching lens, and always remembering, we're not there to solve the problem, but we're there to help facilitate. And so as a coach, it's about asking those hard questions. It's about, and not being afraid to challenge some of the thoughts you're thinking, and knowing that it has to come from the team and the team dynamics as what action looks like. And we're there to facilitate the process.
Awesome. Thank you, Heather, for sharing your expertise on psychological safety with us today. I love this conversation. Thank you, Heather.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nancy, for having me.
Thank you for joining us on the role of psychological concepts in coaching. Stay curious, stay inspired, and join us next time as we continue to explore the transformative power of psychology in coaching. Until then, keep thriving and making a difference. I am Nancy Al-Hayari on behalf of Race and Thrive Through Coaching, wishing you all the best on your coaching journey.